I gotcha. Okay, let's go. You and I have like, grazed the girl from Uncle, basically, like little bits here and there. But let's talk a little bit about it. One thing that I was curious about, and I realized it was a long time ago, and fair enough, if it doesn't come back, but you had some really cool guest stars on there. You had Boris Karloff, you had Fernando Lamas, you had Yvonne DeCarlo, Ellen Corby. I mean, what do you recall anything
And
about any of them?
Southern, we had Peggy Lee.
Wow.
We had, oh gosh, I mean, there's so numerous. It's hard to remember. I tell you what it was, I believe, and why we were so fortunate in these guest stars is because at the time the studios were really divesting themselves of, a lot of things. In 1948, the Securities Exchange Commission designated that the motion picture industry was a monopoly,
Hmm.
that they made the product, they distributed the product, and they exhibited the product. So they forced, I mean, sort of like Apple, or sort of like
Hmm.
Amazon, or sort
Right.
of, oh, we've got so many monopolies these days that it's almost laughable
It
that
is.
nobody does anything about breaking up some of these monopolies. In fact, they keep adding to them, they
Right.
keep acquiring, and everybody's acquiring. And what happened to that old adage that broke up the movie business?
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, do we have to remember these things and
Right.
make the government accountable? Because otherwise, we'll be run by five industries or five
It-
companies,
oh, without a doubt.
without a doubt. So anyway, as you can tell, I feel passionate about that.
Well, I
and
like that passion. That's okay.
and so at the time, the industry had they had interestingly enough, because the industry was created by a certain group of people. They were an amazing group, mostly Jewish people.
That's correct.
Jewish men who had come as immigrants to this country. There's a wonderful book about the Jews that created Hollywood. Many of them had very little education.
Hmm.
Somehow they all were spontaneously struck by the same vision of how movies could entertain and
Right.
how they could create a fictional world that the public could immerse themselves in and pay to buy tickets to see.
Oh yeah.
Uh, a friend of mine was Judy Balaban, who unfortunately just died this year
Ooh.
in her 90s. Her father was Barney Balaban, who ran and was the major stockholder in Paramount Pictures.
Oh my gosh.
Uh, it's fascinating. His mother, so it's only that recently that they were in the greengrocery business in Chicago, I believe it was the south side of Chicago, in the Jewish area. Mama Balaban went to a Nickelodeon, which was where you paid a nickel, you went in, you put your eyes onto a thing and you moved it, and there was a moving image.
Right.
She came home and she said, I know the business we're going to be in.
Wow.
There's no spoilage. People don't buy on credit like they do with a grocery store.
Yeah.
And you pay before you go in. So, based on all of that, the Balabans created an incredible business. They built and owned the Chicago Theater, which has 3,000 seats.
Yeah.
And those
I'm from that area, so I know
But
that
you
theater.
remember the Chicago Theater? It's still there. It's
Hmm.
the it's a movie palace, and they had a floor show, and they had movies, and so it was. It's only that recently that this industry was born.
Yeah, I
It's an
agree.
incredible story, all based on the imagination of these people. Where they got it, we will never know, and how they managed to create this fantasy world of movies
Oh yeah.
that we're still living off of. We're
I agree.
still we're still living off of this fantasy. So we have a great deal to thank for those families. But interestingly enough, because they were families, one son would go into the distribution business and another to buddies, and then they'd marry each other. Their daughter would marry this son or that. So the Laskys and the this and that, who owned the theater chains, were all related to the people who owned the
Oh, no
studios.
doubt about it. Yeah.
So when they divested themselves first of the cinema chains, they still were owned by the families. So
Right.
they
Kind
were
of
the
a joke.
largest
Yeah.
shareholders. So it was a very strange thing. So by the time, television takes over, or begins to take over, because I remember when I was under contract to Columbia Pictures, I wasn't allowed to do television because the philosophy was, if people could see you for free, they would never pay to go into a cinema.
Wow. Was Harry Cohn still there?
He had just died when
Ah,
I was put under contract,
okay.
but the specter of Harry Cohen was still there.
Oh, I
Yeah.
believe it. Yeah.
So after 5 years of being under contract, they sold me, because I belonged to them and they could sell me. They
Wow.
sold my contract to MGM to do The Girl from U.N.C.L.E. So it was really a big change. Went to a new studio. It was a whole new family. And what was happening in the interim was that the studios used to carry a tremendous amount of peep actors under contract, as their stable of
Mhm.
stars and character actors. We're letting go all these contracts and making all of these people recognizable, wonderful movie stars. I mean, Cesar Romero and
Yeah. Well, Boris Karloff. I mean, come on.
Boris Karloff.
Yeah.
They were letting them go from their contractual obligations, and they were only keeping a nucleus of young potential stars to do cheap movies for the youth, for the young population,
Right.
in order to get them in the theaters. So we had access to all of these fantastic actors
Wow. Wow.
who also needed to work to keep up their health care with the union.
Oh, yeah. And that hasn't stopped, but yeah.
That hasn't stopped. That's still the same thing.
It is. What so do you remember Karloff, or do you remember
Oh, very well.
Yeah.
Absolutely, very, very well. And because he was wearing, he was performing in drag. So it was called the Mother Muffin Affair. And
Oh, God.
he played Mother Muffin in drag, which was hilarious.
Oh my gosh.
Hilarious.
Oh, I would have loved to have seen it. What do you remember about him? I mean, I have a lot of, believe me, I have a ton of subscribers that love the whole the Universal.
Well, he was, I don't know if you know anything about his early career, but he was a very serious and very seriously regarded theatrical star in England.
Yes.
And his early films also he did before he became known for playing a monster. He did some very wonderful performances. So
Yeah.
he was the real deal. He was an ultimate professional, and he was cheeky. He had an English sense of humor, great smile, and a lovely, lovely man. I met his wife. I met his daughter. They visited the set, and I did contribute to a book that was recently written about Boris. And
Oh.
whoops, excuse me.
Yep. I can. Of course I can.
Joe, I'll call you back. Bye.
No worries. Like I said, life happens while
Life goes on. Yeah.
What has that book been released, by the way?
It has, and I'm not.
Okay.
I know I've got it. I think I've got it at my office.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll have to find out. Well, I guess you can find it on the internet.
I'll look for it because I'm a huge fan.
Latest
So
Boris
no, I'll definitely.
Karloff
I didn't realize it had been out. Okay.
It was out. I think it was only a couple of years ago that it came out.
Okay. All right. I'll look for it. And what about Yvonne DeCarlo? Any memories of her?
Well, yes, I had worked. I knew Yvonne DeCarlo because she worked on McClintock.
Oh my gosh! I always think of Maureen O'Hara and John Wayne. I forgot about that.
Yes,
you're right.
She was in McClintock.
Yeah. Jeez.
And
Yeah,
Hart.
let's talk about that if you don't mind. Her and McClintock.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, Yvonne was she was a lovely woman, and Yvonne was married to a stuntman,
Hmm.
and life was very difficult for her at the time because he was doing a fight. You every time I see How the West Was Won,
Mm-hmm.
there's a famous fight that he is doubling um, George
George
Peppard,
Papard. Yeah.
and it's a fight that takes place on these on the platform car of a railroad that has gigantic uh, um, uh, logs of huge trees
Mm-hmm.
that are chained together. And during the fight, the chain breaks, the logs move, etc. During that fight, Yvonne DeCarlo's husband slipped and
Oh.
went under the train and lost his legs.
Mm.
Can you imagine?
No, I can't.
And survived.
Mm.
So the whole process of his recovery was a really, really difficult experience.
Oh
And
God.
unfortunately, he didn't, he was not, how shall I say, terribly kind to her. Being the closest person to him, sometimes we take out our frustrations on the people who are
Sure.
closest to us.
Sure.
And
I think that's, yeah, unfortunate but true.
it was a very difficult time for her during McClintock.
Mm.
And later on, I believe by the time she did The Girl from U.N.C.L.E, he had passed.
Okay. I got you. I got you. What well, what about what about McClintock? Hey, what about McClintock? No, what I look, I love John Wayne, hands on, but I got to be really honest. I have been a fan of Maureen O'Hara since the first time I ever saw her. And I've watched like The Quiet Man with the two of them as well as McClintock multiple times. I mean, the woman, what was she like? I guess offset because she was just, I don't know, she's beautiful, but so strong, you know?
Okay, off the set. I don't know why we've lost the. Everybody refers to a set. I don't know whose idea was it to lose the. The stage, the theater, the cinema, and now we call it set. What does that mean? It's the set, isn't it? And suddenly
Yeah.
we call it on set. Well, excuse me, what is that from? Commercials?
Yeah, it's called Everything Has Gotten Shortened. You are correct.
Well,
Yeah.
that's stupid. I'm sorry. I
Yep.
believe
Yep.
in pronouns. um, in any event, can you imagine? Well, I loved my stepfather bred racehorses, so I was around horses and of course Western movies and oh my gosh, were just everything.
Wow.
I think I must have seen The Searchers, you know, 15 times. Every time
Oh.
it's on, I watch it again.
Oh yeah,
It's
it's one of those if you're flicking through and it's there, you got to stop. Yep, I
it's
agree.
as perfect a movie as has ever been filmed.
Hmm.
It's right on the shelf with Lawrence of Arabia, and it
I
is
agree with you.
perfection.
Yeah.
And so imagine when Columbia Pictures said, go on over to Paramount and go see Michael Wayne. They want to meet you for a movie. Okay, well, I didn't think about Michael Wayne. I didn't know. So like I was a teenager,
Yeah, you
No.
were pretty young for McClintock. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so I drove over to Paramount and they showed me where Bat Jack Productions was. And I walked in and sat around until they said, okay, then Michael will see you now. And sitting in the room was this man who was slightly bald. And he was sitting in a chair, he didn't stand up. And I walked in and introduced myself, and I was Michael was behind the desk, and he sat me down, and I sat down, and I kept looking at this man, and I didn't recognize him because he didn't have his toupee on.
Oh no, don't tell me it was John Wayne.
Yes,
Oh my gosh, I didn't pick up on that.
I
Wow.
didn't
Okay.
recognize him until he started to talk,
Oh wow.
and then he suddenly said, "Well, I think I'll I'll let you two talk together, but I think she's okay. And he got up and left. And I was speechless, speechless.
Wow. Wow. And was it, did you have to read, or was it just you just talked and they felt you were right?
Those were the days.
Oh my gosh, that was it.
That was it.
So what was Maureen like? I guess
Well, I knew Maureen way before I ever worked with her. Maureen's daughter and I, Rowan, and I knew each other. And Maureen, I had met in Mexico in Acapulco,
hmm,
and she had a long relationship with a man who was an assistant aide to the vice president or to the president of Mexico. He was at a time acting vice president, and then he resigned from that. And he had two sons. He had a son, and he was raising his nephew, Kiko and Lalo. And so every time, and Maureen lived up the Stone Canyon beyond the Bel Air Hotel. And every time they would be up from Mexico, I'd be called in so that Brown and I could go out with the boys.
huh.
So I knew her on that level. And then when we all showed up on the set
I knew you were going to
uh,
say that. I knew you were going to
in
do that. Yeah.
in Arizona, it was a lovely reunion, and she was adorable to me. You know, she
Hmm.
would always say, "Do this, this, and don't do this," and she'd give me little secrets. She'd give me little coaching.
Wow. I love hearing that. I really do. You know, by the
I knew her. I knew her till her last year when she was here. She was living with Connor, her grandson, because Brown had died,
oh,
and her daughter. And we stayed in touch. We would see each other, and sometimes in Ireland, and sometimes in California when she'd come for one reason or another, because Command Central was Roddy McDowell. And Roddy McDowell knew everybody in the movie business. And everybody's first phone call when they arrived in Los Angeles was to Roddy McDowell. And then eventually there'd be a dinner at Roddy's. The food was never good, but the company was exceptional. 5-star company. And I would see Maureen there.
wow.
And I was with Maureen uh, at the last trip that she made to California to receive her honorary Academy Award at the dinner before the Academy Awards,
Hmm.
and then she went back to gosh, where were they living? Um, uh, I think they were living in the north somewhere,
Okay.
um, and. Uh, and she was at home with her grandson when she passed.
Wow. You know, she did that film much later, and I don't know if she did another one after it or not, but she did the one with John Candy,
Oh
where,
yes,
and
yes.
you know, I love it. I love it because, like I said, I'm a fan of hers. And when she comes on the screen, yes, she's older. She still has that like energy and that glint in her eye. I mean, it's just amazing to me. I feel like she just, she didn't lose it. You know what I mean?
She didn't lose it. She never lost it. You know, she was a real Irish lady. You know,
Right.
and she. Did you ever hear her sing? Oh my
No.
God, she had a fabulous voice. She
Oh,
said, like all
really?
the Irish, they seem to sing, it's and
Yeah.
she had a lovely voice, but she had that Irish tenacity,
Yeah.
she'd carry on no matter what, you know.
Oh, I love that. I just love that. You know, the other thing that I was going to mention that before I forget that I found like just mind blowing is you had like ballet class. I think I'm right in this. It was ballet class with Jill St. John, Natalie Wood, and yourself.
That's
Come
it. Yes,
on.
there's a
What?
photograph. There's a rather famous photograph that well, I found my mother kept it, and I gave it to RJ, and then he put it out in his book. And yes, and there's Natalie, Jill and me. I was about, I don't know how old, 6, something like that.
I
6 or 7.
mean, that's kind of wild. You know, what are they? If you were sitting there rolling the dice in
Well, that's
Vegas,
what I mean about the fact that it was a very small town, very, very small town. It was, uh, you know, Michel Panayev, who ran this class, this and had a little kiddies ballet company,
mhm,
was also he had been a premier dancer with the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo, and he was a very well known dancer. He was Russian, and so he was when the Ballet Russe was on tour in 1941. Um, Pearl Harbor happened,
mm,
and war was declared. And we still, I believe, have a law that if we declare war, every male in the United States is subject to the draft, no
mhm,
matter if you're a citizen or not.
mm.
I don't know if that's enforceable anymore, but I think it still exists.
Interesting.
So he was drafted, and he was, interestingly enough, and he went back to Europe in a tank. He was drafted into the tank corps. He was this
Wow.
ballet dancer in the tank corps.
Wow.
So when he survived, thank goodness, he
Yeah.
survived the European campaign and was offered to become a citizen of the United States rapidly, immediately,
Oh,
because
yeah,
of
yeah, yeah.
his service. And when he decided where he wanted to, well, he couldn't go back to Europe anyway. Europe was in ruins. And so he decided that he thought California, Southern California, reminded him of the Riviera because it had palm trees. And
Hmm.
that's where the Ballet Russe is located in Monaco. So he decided to settle here. And obviously, in the 1950s, word got out that this great ballet dancer was giving classes, and every professional dancer went to his classes. I remember seeing Leslie Caron,
Oh,
Jean Maire, all of these brilliant dancers who were under contract to MGM or all the studios. Everybody would attend his professional classes. All the dancers, I mean, everybody who was here on a visit would attend his classes. So the
wow.
youngsters' classes, which I think they were on Saturdays and maybe one day a week. I don't think there were a lot of them.
Hmm.
And so everybody wanted their daughters to go to ballet class with Michel Panayev.
Wow.
And that's what, because the town was that small,
Mm.
as I said, rather incestuous. And in the case of the three of us, everybody was married to Robert Wagner in one way or another. I was his
I
TV wife,
know.
and the others were his real wives.
I mean, seriously, that's crazy. That's just crazy.
It's a
Did
funny
you
story.
did you stay in touch with Natalie through her whole life then, or was there like you
No, I
guys knew
just,
each other and then
I
you
saw
met
her.
later?
I sort of saw her again when, uh, from childhood, because I was growing up, and Natalie was 3 or 4 years older than me.
Oh,
Um, and I think 4 years older than me. Jill is 3 years older. I think Natalie is 4 years old, was 4 years older than me. And so in those days, when you're young, 4 years is a huge difference. And she
it
was,
is.
went on to have a very illustrious career, and
Hmm.
James Dean and all of that. She was working, and I was still in school. I was a little thing.
Hmm.
And then came West Side Story. And I went to 16 dance auditions and did 3 screen tests. I
Oh
was still
my
underage
gosh.
to be Velma, one of the Jets. And then I was asked to uh, go to get working papers because I was a minor. And my mother had to be on the set, and I could only work so many hours. And after about 6 weeks rehearsal, and all of the principals started coming in, Cheetah Rivera, Rusty Tamblyn, George Chakiris, and then finally Natalie was cast. But I remember when Natalie and RJ came on to the rehearsal set and watched us do the number Cool.
Mm.
There was Natalie and there was RJ, and they came around and met all the dancers. And I said to her, we were in Peniv's ballet class together. And she was, oh my God. So that was the next time I met her. And the first time I met RJ.
Wow.
And then Fade Out, Fade In. I didn't do the movie. I didn't last for the movie because, as I said, I was underage and it was ridiculous. I didn't have a part that was really important to the process of the film. So they replaced me with a girl who had done the part on Broadway, I guess.
Oh, wow.
And but I remained very friendly with everybody. And the person, the dancer, Carol DeAndrea was her name. She replaced me, and I used to meet I used to be included in their little parties and things like that. So I used to meet some of them, and with Carol. And Carol at the time was going with an actor called Robert Morris,
Oh, yeah, sure.
Bobby Morris.
Yeah.
And they eventually got married. And Fade Out, Fade In. Years later, I did a movie with Bobby.
Oh my gosh.
We did a Disney movie called The Boatniks.
Oh, of course. Of
Yeah.
course. Yeah.
So it
Wow.
was, that when the industry is that small,
Yeah.
it's wonderful. It's
Yeah.
really wonderful because it gives you some context, continuity
Hmm.
when people come around in your lives again.
I'm so envious that you were part of that time. I find it just magic. Hey, to kind of close
Sure.
out the interview more or less, because you've been so kind to stay this long. I wanted to mention that and I believe you already were, but it was recently honored at the United Nations. Is that correct?
Well, the event took place at the UN.
Hmm.
It was not a UN event, but it was a UN acknowledged event. There are
Hmm.
all these little nuances about what it is. And it is actually going to manifesting itself in an ebook, which will be available shortly. And I'll tell Harlan where to get it, and you can see it. And the ebook is actually acknowledging visionaries of the future, people who are doing work of all sorts that benefit either humanity, the environment, in my case, and wildlife. And there are, I think there are about 30 of us, all listed with our CVs and our contacts and websites for our individual work, in the hopes that people will read this and be inspired by some of these stories and hopefully get on the bandwagon
Hmm.
and see themselves as also being able to affect change and affect the sort of works, I'll call them good works,
Hmm.
that some people sacrifice in order to do.
I got you. Two last things. One, before I forget, can you say the website for the Wildlife Foundation?
Oh yes, it's the acronym of the William Holden Wildlife Foundation. It's WHWF.org.
Gotcha. And then my last question is just in relation to the foundation, because you've done so much. What is your hope of where it goes? Where do you hope it leads to all of this work in the long run? Like what's the goal?
Well, that's an interesting word. I have never I've never worked for goals.
Hmm.
I've worked for process.
Okay.
The goal seems axiomatic if the process is correct and if the process is true, and your motivations are through the process, because the process makes you change and adapt and be more flexible than trying to work rigidly for a goal, which
Hmm.
especially since the mission statement of the Wildlife Foundation is wildlife conservation through education and alternatives to habitat destruction,
Hmm.
which are taught and have to be employed in order for people to realize the benefits of it, which ancillarily benefits the world and the climate and the sequestering of moisture and carbon. But education is an ever-changing entity. It must always adapt for the changes in atmosphere, the changes in environment, the changes in people's awareness. So starting out as we did 40 some odd years ago, our education program has adapted and changed dramatically and needs to constantly adapt and change. We have 11,000 students a year that come to us at our main education center for free to understand biodiversity, to understand what creates climate, to understand what our role is in the destruction of climate and what are the manifestations of our destructive activities onto not only the environment that supports us, but our future potential for food sources and climate change.
That's a lot of people.
Unless you understand it, when you're living in a subsistence environment, and someone says you mustn't cut that tree when you need to get some wood for fire to cook your food, unless you understand that if you do cut that tree, you have to plant two and water them and make sure that they return. Because what does that tree mean to you? So trying to understand this, there are some aspects of the society that we deal with that are rapidly understanding everything, and now we have to change to make things more challenging for them. And so we also deal with very rural populations whose ability to understand has never been approached, and make it relevant to them. It's one thing to teach something, but if you're not teaching something that's relevant to people, then it goes in one, they'll say yes, 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 and then they don't get it, and they don't know what their position is and how they participate in this. What does it mean to them? What does the environmental change mean to them, and how did it arrive, and how can they change what it has done to them? Because it has altered their entire lifestyle. The pastoral people who lived off of their wonderful herds of cattle and sheep and goats and everything have completely destroyed their environment. So they no longer have cattle. They no longer have a lot of sheep. They have maybe sheep and a lot of goats, because goats can live on air.
Right, literally, yeah.
But the goats are very destructive to the environment as well. So they have had to change everything without any help or instruction or the understanding of what happened that altered our lives so completely, because it not only alters them physically, but it also sociologically and traditionally. They can no longer do what their traditions have prescribed them to do for millennia. You have to replace that with something. And education is the vehicle.
I mean, to be honest with you, I was kind of blown away when you said 11,000. I didn't think
that's
we were
only
talking
at
about.
the 11,000 is at the education center. We have an outreach program which deals with another about 6,000 people.
Wow, how large of an area are we talking about?
He's right. Yes, we're busy.
Yeah. How, because I
anybody
think
wants
of
to help us, anyone wants to write a check, it's tax deductible, and it really, really benefits a lot of people.
How big is the actual, where the original, ranch was, or however you want to describe that? How large has that been expanded in the 40
Well, it
years.
hasn't been, nothing's changed. The
Huh.
acreage hasn't changed because the population has increased you know, not just exponentially, it's increased beyond expectations. If you
Wow.
imagine that in at the time of independence, the population was 1963, the population of Kenya was roughly 9 million people. Today, it's over 55 million.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay.
And you see, in a country such as Kenya, not all the land is arable.
Hmm.
There is some forest, but it's greatly diminished from what it used to be.
Hmm.
So not only is only about a third of the land mass arable, there's a greater demand on it.
Right.
And there is a tremendous conflict between human-animal demands.
Hmm.
The environmental demand is tremendous because of the use of chemicals, please God,
Hmm.
that arrived and were the miracles to produce all kinds of food.
Mm-hmm.
The chemicals, it's now a negative aspect to the chemicals.
Yeah.
So the chemicals which were used as fertilizer and as a pesticide are now causing disease and killing the soil, and all the microcosms in the microbiology in the soil is either dead or it's permanently asleep.
Hmm.
Our form of offering alternatives to habitat destruction is an accelerated method of reestablishing biodiversity and microorganisms in the soil.
Hmm.
And then followed by another form of agriculture that will produce for small shareholders. We're not talking about factory farms. We're talking about 1 acre to 10 acres worth of farming land, which is the sort of farming that the average person has.
Yeah.
And only the big conglomerates have factory farms. And that's a lot of it for export purposes. They employ a tremendous amount of people. I think it's about 60% of the population is employed in agricultural pursuits.
Wow, that's high. Yeah. Okay.
It's high. So agriculture is a very important issue.
Mm-hmm.
And not only for survival, but for, you know, its contribution to climate change.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Wow.
But I think we can see that there are several very good documentaries that are available on YouTube. That one is called Kiss the Ground. And then the same people made another one called, it's an added on to, it's an extrapolation of what Kiss the Ground covers. But Kiss the Ground really sort of states the case. And when you realize that, then you really realize that the way we create food on this planet is the largest contributor to climate change. Forget about e-cars.
Mm-hmm.
They're dangerous. We
Mm-hmm.
don't have grids to plug in cars for everybody. We don't have a grid. And what does the grid work on? Coal?
Right.
What powers the grid? Did anybody ask that question?
Right. I know. I know they're looking at nuclear now, like coming back. Yeah.
All right, so we've got all of these issues. It's not just a flat issue,
Right.
but it is absolutely obvious that we've cut down so much of the green belt
Mm-hmm.
in order to accommodate factory farming all over the world.
Yeah.
That now the planet can't recover.
Right.
So we have to look at new ways of agriculture. We have to look at it and reestablish the kind of system, or recreate the system that evolved over millennium.
Right.
That we've destroyed.
Yeah, totally.
And we have to do it in an accelerated fashion because we're running out of time.
Right.
And that's not a joke.
No, it's not.
And it's not something we can avoid.
Right.
And it's nobody else's job. It's our job. It's our job as individuals to stand for it. It's our job to demand better quality health and food in the marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
It's our job to stand up for that. And it's our job to educate ourselves. No one should be expecting somebody to do this for them.
Right. I agree. It's got to start with one, at least. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Fantastic. Stefanie, I loved having you on. I wasn't I was sincere when this started. I was really looking forward to having you on. You did not disappoint in any way. You were incredible. I could talk to you for hours. And I thank you so much for, your time and the causes too that you are, you know, obviously, are dear to your heart. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, John. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Take care of yourself.
You too.
Bye-bye. Well, thanks for listening, and definitely hit the subscription button. As well, hit the notification bell so that you'll know when my next episode is released. In addition, check out some of my other interviews if you haven't had a chance. Eric Roberts, Henry Winkler, Jerry Mathers from Leave It to Beaver. There's so many. Enjoy.